Welcome to Healthy Hearts and Lungs. I'm your host, Tyson Banner, and today we're going to be talking about COPD. It's a condition that involves our respiratory system, and I invited somebody from Intermountain Healthcare in Dixie Regional Medical Center who's in charge of the Better Breathers Club. Her name's Tammy. So, hi, Tammy. How are you doing?
Oh, just dandy. Need some more caffeine, but we're doing great.
Well, same. I'm always feeling that exact same way. Especially right now, it's finals week at Dixie, and so I have a lot of tiresome stress going on. It's not fun.
Finishing up loose ends. I know how it goes. I'm in my finals week as well.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, I'm excited to have you on the podcast. I think that you're going to have a lot of really good information for our listeners, as we'll have a lot of listeners wanting to know about how to manage their conditions and how to still get the most out of life despite their conditions. So just tell me a little bit about the Better Breathers Club and what you guys do.
You bet. So Better Breathers is actually a monthly support group meeting that is sponsored by the American Lung Association. You can have it anywhere. You can have it, there's lots of supporting organizations. Some hospitals support them, some care centers support them, some communities just support them. So what it does is the regularly scheduled once a month in-person support groups. However, since the pandemic reared its ugly head, we've actually had to go to virtual meetings. And when we did that, we combined the total of 5 sites together all over the state of Utah into one virtual meeting.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's one big meeting. How many participants do you usually have during that?
You would actually think it would be more than what you would think. When we were in person down here at Dixie, we'd average in between about 15 and 20 people. And when we went virtual, we'd probably get no more than 5 across the state.
Oh my gosh. So it seems like people prefer to be a little more in person then.
They do, especially that generation. They're not as tech savvy, and that generation is more in-person communication. My generation was more, starting of the, cell phone email type generation, and you get into Gen Y and Gen Z and you're looking at texting or apps or for communication, a lot less in-person communication. So yeah, it has affected this generation quite a bit.
Yeah, and I guess that is really tough for people who I'm sure benefited a lot from the Better Breathers Club, because it's the goal to help these people to be feeling better, but when they can't meet in person and it's difficult to get on Zoom, they kind of lose that learning and that benefit from the club.
Right. And they tend to network a lot. And so it has been really kind of hard on them. They still contact me, but not during the meetings. So hopefully once we get back to in-person, and my guess will be May, June, hopefully we'll get back to our regular numbers.
That'll be good. Hopefully with vaccines rolling out, we'll get that happening soon.
I hope so.
Yeah. As far as the meetings go, when you're having your monthly meeting, sounds like really beneficial. What sort of things do you guys go over during the meetings?
Well, it can be various topics. Usually we'll go over different disease process, because it's not just COPD, it's any kind of lung condition. I have pulmonary fibrosis, interstitial lung disease patients that come. I have some that have a genetic type of emphysema called alpha-1 antitrypsin. I have good old COPDers come. So it's anybody with a lung condition can join in the meetings, and their spouses.
Oh, wow. And then the spouses can learn how to help their significant others as well.
Because they're their primary caregivers.
Oh, that's cool. And then you're organizing the meetings. Are you also providing education and other things during those meetings, or what are you?
Absolutely. Let me give you a little bit of background about why we decided to start the Better Breathers Club.
Okay.
I'm the pulmonary disease navigator for Dixie Regional Medical Center, and I noticed a large gap in patients' education about their disease and management, especially COPD. Patients can enroll in pulmonary rehab classes, but if they're not what we call a gold stage 2, insurances won't pay for it. Also, if they don't do pulmonary rehab, they can't afford the copays, or if they live at distance, because we cover such a large geographical area with our hospitals. So there's lots of reasons that they don't join pulmonary rehab. So when I started to investigate Better Breathers as a kind of a gap measure for that, because I have the opportunity to educate people in the hospital. I run an outpatient clinic as well, so I can educate them there, but that's such a small percentage of the patients that have lung conditions in our area. So we started meeting, like I said, about 2 years ago, and then had to stop because of the pandemics and go to the online version. So with what we do, we have different topics that we can educate the patients on, as well as we have also fun activities as well. Some of the topics that we've talked about multiple disease processes, breathing techniques. We've had a nutritionist come. Every year we have an insurance agent come and talk about open enrollment, especially Medicare.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is a maze for them to try and go through, trying to pick the right one, which one's going to cover it, because patients, especially COPD patients, they have to choose between a $300 a month inhaler or $300 worth of groceries.
Oh, yeah.
It's heartbreaking. It truly is
Yeah.
heartbreaking. So we cover a lot of those things. We'll cover their medication regimens, any kind of testing that they might have to go through. We do educational sessions on that, oxygen therapy. This past month, which was actually, we had a Better Breathers this past Wednesday, and we did humor therapy, laughter therapy.
Huh.
And because this is quite a debilitating disease, and there's a high propensity for depression with any kind of a lung disease, because they can't breathe, so they don't want to go anywhere. They start hibernating, and it's just kind of a downward spiral. So we use humor therapy. Every once in a while, I'll bring this out of the bag and do it, and it's actually kind of fun to be able to hear the stories that they have, and some of them are absolutely hilarious. So it's a lot of fun. One of the ones that we bring back also, besides the insurance and the nutritionist, and we have a physician come every now and then, is next month we're going to be doing one on advanced care planning. Because I feel that once you get this disease, doesn't matter if it's COPD or an interstitial lung disease, you need to start planning. Actually, from the time you are 18 years old, you should be doing your advanced care planning. What are your wishes?
Huh.
So that's somebody that we're going to have. Stacy Wallencheck is going to come share with us her expertise on that next month.
Wow. It really is like an all-encompassing sort of meeting. It's just like every aspect of your life, how to manage it when you have some sort of lung condition.
Absolutely.
Sounds very beneficial. And you guys meet the first Wednesday of every month. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. And so if we have any listeners that haven't heard about this before, how can they become a part of the Better Breathers Club?
Well, they can either get on the American Lung Association's website and look for our location, or they can actually call and get some information about it. And my phone number, direct line, is 435-251-1651.
Great. I think that'll be a really great opportunity for our listeners if they haven't heard about the Better Breathers Club. Hopefully they have, but if they haven't,
Mhm.
that'll be a really great resource for them. So I hope that that becomes something that more people are using. Sounds really beneficial.
Absolutely.
Well, that's great. So that's a great resource for those who are not wanting to wait until um, next Wednesday or whatever. I wanted to talk about some of the common forms of COPD and where do they come from, how to manage them, what we can do as a community to support people who have these conditions. So I think that's what we'll get going into now. Um, let's talk about bronchitis first. So this is a condition where the bronchial tubes, or the tubes that go to your lungs, start to get inflamed and have a lot of mucus. Um, so we have these problems. Tammy, do you have any insight on how we can prevent this and how we can manage this?
Um, so actually with COPD, there's 5 different diseases in COPD. COPD is kind of an umbrella diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
There is the chronic bronchitis, then there's emphysema, then there's bronchiectasis, there is a crossover asthma, and then there is cystic fibrosis. So
Okay.
with chronic bronchitis is, well, I should say bronchitis itself, occurs when you have a viral or bacterial infection that inflames the airways, like you said. So in order to calm those airways, the lungs go, let's find some way to, cool them down a little bit. So it produces mucus, and it produces more mucus and lots of mucus. So how they diagnose chronic bronchitis is if you have bronchitis for 2 years in a row for at least 3 months. And where the damage comes in to that will turn it into COPD, it's because it starts to scar and damage the inside of the lung, where those little fingers that help move all the mucus up start getting damaged, and they start to retain more and more mucus, which can create more and more infections. So that's actually kind of the chronic bronchitis. Um,
Wow. And so it's from what I've understood and learned, it can even lead into other issues where we're having difficulty with our respiratory system. If we get the flu or something else, then we're going to really have a lot of issues with breathing, and then that can lead to a lot worse prognoses.
Absolutely. I have patients actually have worse outcomes when they end up with viral infections than they do bacterial infections, because bacterial infections generally can be treated with antibiotics. However, those viral infections, it's one of those, it's a time issue. You just got to outlast it. And so the goal is to avoid exposures overall. So, I'm kind of grateful that everybody's wearing masks during these high viral seasons. And my COPDers during this pandemic have done an amazing job at hibernating and staying away from any potential infectious areas, highly infectious areas.
Well, that's good for us to know as a community that, and I think it's important to realize, I think sometimes it's easy to forget that when we're wearing a mask during this time of high viral infections like COVID and the flu, that it's not just helping us, but it's even maybe more importantly, it's helping those that we love, like those who are elderly and those who have certain conditions that put them at risk. So it's good to
Absolutely.
know. Well, if someone does have bronchitis, what are some tips that you have for them to manage that and to keep it at bay, so to speak?
Okay. So besides avoiding the exposures during the highly contagious season, chronic bronchitis, because of the inflammation, will generally need an inhaled steroid to help decrease the inflammation that's on the inside of the tube, and a bronchodilator like albuterol to help relax the smooth muscle that has tightened down on the tube. Another over-the-counter medication that they can use is called Mucinex or guaifenesin, and that helps to thin the mucus and make it easier for them to cough and get it out of their lungs.
Oh, that's nice. So then we actually have some treatments where we're getting rid of the mucus, opening up some airways, making it easier to breathe.
Hmm.
Well, that's good.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Um, and I actually learned talking to you just now that from what I've learned, bronchitis and emphysema are more common conditions with COPD, but I hadn't learned about um, cystic fibrosis. I know about
Hmm.
asthma, and then there was one other that you had talked about as well.
Bronchiectasis.
Bronchiectasis. Can you tell me a little bit more about that one?
You bet. Bronchiectasis is where the tubes in your lungs kind of get like potholes in them, and they tend to collect lots and lots of mucus. And then it's infection after infection after infection. It kind of will mimic chronic bronchitis after that, but it's because of those little potholes, they tend to have a lot more mucus than bronchitis will.
Oh wow. So it for lack of a better understanding, it's kind of like a more intense version of bronchitis. Getting some more mucus in there and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, and they've actually damaged the walls to where they get, I hate to call them blowouts, but kind of like if you think potholes, that's what happens to them.
Yeah, kind of like like a pothole on the road, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so almost
Right.
like a divot or something. Wow,
Mm-hmm.
that sounds really intense.
Yeah, it's very, very underdiagnosed compared to the others. So
With
we do recommend a lot of, especially patients that have a lot of chronic bronchitis or unexplained amounts of mucus, we'll have them get a CAT scan just to see if they have damage to their lungs, like bronchiectasis.
Oh, okay. And so that'll help the doctors to see if it's just bronchitis or we have bronchiectasis. Am I
Mm-hmm.
saying it right? Bronchiectasis?
Uh-huh. Bronchiectasis.
That's hard to say. Okay.
It is.
Um,
It's a mouthful.
and are those similar treatments to treat bronchiectasis? Are we using bronchodilators and things like that?
We do use bronchodilators. Bronchiectasis tends to use vest therapy or chest physiotherapy. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. One is they can use a vest type system where it literally shakes the daylights out of you, and it helps to move that mucus. Cystic fibrosis patients use it as well. As well as there's a flutter type device. It's kind of like a duck call almost. You blow through it and it rattles the inside of your lungs to help that mucus kind of break off the walls and help come up and be able to expel that.
Oh, that's
But
interesting. Kind of using the
mhm,
vibrations from the reed or the duck call or whatever to, yeah, to shake it all off and
yeah,
kind of,
mhm.
it's
It's
like a
such a
dog
simple
shaking the water
device.
off of theirself. Okay.
Pretty much, pretty much.
That is very interesting. There's some really interesting treatments for these things.
We get creative. Respiratory
Yeah.
therapy does.
Oh, wow. I wanted to make sure we covered the other conditions as well, and we'll talk more about treatments later for these in general. What about
Mhm.
emphysema? Can you tell us a
All
little
right.
bit about emphysema and how that's treated?
Absolutely. Emphysema occurs when any foreign irritant lands in the alveoli or air sacs. It could be cigarette smoke. It's not the only thing. You could have environmental pollutants, you could have chemical inhalants, you could have dust. So what happens is when that irritant gets down in the alveoli, the body goes, aha, I've got to go clean that up. So it sends out these little cleaners called macrophages, and it cleans up all that stuff in the alveoli, but it doesn't turn itself off very well. So while it's cleaning itself up, it destroys the elasticity of the alveoli. So the alveoli kind of go from water balloon, elasticity to almost paper bag elasticity, and that's emphysema. Where it destroys the walls of the alveoli, and it can they really get floppy. They tend to um, create air trapping because you just don't exhale all that old air very well. So what happens with emphysema is you tend to have, they get really, they'll get enlarged and misshapen. So they don't hold the air very well. They don't transfer oxygen and carbon dioxide back and forth into the bloodstream very well because the vascular bed is destroyed as well.
Huh. That, and that makes sense. So these air pockets are not able to exchange the air. So your whole body's not getting the oxygen that it needs to do most anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine places like northern Utah where there's a lot of pollution in the air would be difficult for emphysema. What about around here in St. George area? Is the weather here good, or the climate? Is the air quality okay? I guess is what I'm trying to
The
ask.
Right, the air quality actually is pretty good, but what affects most lung patients down here is the heat and the cold. Now, granted, we're not as cold as we are in northern Utah, but that sudden change in temperature can affect them, and the dryness of the air sometimes. You see more problems with asthmatics than you do anything else, especially when you have that cold snap that comes in.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So we got the cold. So does the cold snap affect people with emphysema as well, or is it more just asthma that's affecting?
It's more asthma. Generally, what affects emphysema, especially during the winter months, is usually those viral infections.
Mm, that makes sense. Wow. And so luckily being in St. George, we don't have as many irritants for people, but we do need to be worried about the viral infections for
Right.
people with emphysema. Are there any different or unique treatments for emphysema that would be good for our listeners at home to start looking into and getting involved in?
No, it's usually for emphysema, it's generally bronchodilators
Oh, okay.
more than anything
Similar.
else. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Well, great. That's good to know. We have two other conditions I wanted to make sure we covered since they're both common. Let's start with asthma. A lot of people know asthma is a condition where we're worried about the body's response to some sort of environmental issue, and so it causes a difficulty breathing. Can you provide a little more insight in that for us, Tammy?
You bet. So asthma is originally restrictive disease. It's not COPD. It can cross over into it if it gets bad enough, but it's generally just a restrictive disease and a reversible process. Most asthma is allergy type related, strong smells, hot and cold. It's anything that's the lungs are going to go, nope, we're not having that. And they just kind of clamp down. So the way that the lungs are built, you have your trachea. Your trachea breaks into the two lungs, and they're called bronchi. And the bronchus get smaller and smaller until they get to those little air sacs. Well, in asthma, it's not necessarily the air sacs that are the problem. It's the tube right before the air sacs. So there is smooth muscle that is wrapped around those tubes. And when you have an exacerbation or a flare-up, those tubes clamp down. So you can normally take a breath in. Well, a lot of people think, I can't get a breath in. No, you can get a breath in. The problem is when you take a breath in, your diaphragms drop, air passively rushes in. And when you go to exhale, those tubes go, nope, and they clamp down. And it traps air in those air sacs. That's called air trapping. So what's going to help to relax that tube is a fast-acting or a short-acting bronchodilator like albuterol. Now, albuterol comes in a couple of different names: albuterol, Ventolin, Proventil, ProAir. It just kind of depends on the manufacturer. I had a sweet little grandma call me one night. She's like, Tam, I'm having a hard time breathing. I just don't know what to do. My heart rate's high. I says, well, how high is your heart rate? She said 166. I says, my goodness. I says, what have you been doing? She's like, well, I first took my Pro Air, and then I took my Ventolin, and then I took my Albert. I'm like, oh no, you overdosed. And that's where the education comes in, is these patients are generally handed an inhaler, and they say, when you get short of breath, puff on this. They don't realize, my goodness, she just took 3 of the same medications. So so when you have those asthmatic attacks, your rescue inhaler is your albuterol, and that helps to relax that. And that is kind of across the board. That happens with chronic bronchitis, that happens with emphysema, that happens with asthma, that happens with cystic fibrosis, not necessarily so much with bronchiectasis, but that helps to relax that.
Okay, wow, that's good to know. I actually have exercise induced and allergy induced asthma, and so every once in a while I have to use albuterol. And it was kind of funny, I never had a problem with it until my first spring, when I moved here to St. George, and it was allergy season, and I had allergies, but I also had difficulty breathing, and I was coughing all the time. My poor girlfriend, who's now my wife, had to just listen to me coughing almost constantly for days. And it wasn't until I went to the doctor that I learned that I had asthma because of the allergies.
Yeah, definitely. When you move to a new area, it can flare people up easily, because I mean, it's a different type of allergies. They're new to you.
Yeah, so I think that may be something that listeners don't realize. They might be having some sort of condition, and I think a common, I don't know, a common thing that people think is like, oh, this is part of getting older. I'm having these issues, but there's no real condition. But I think that sometimes our listeners need to realize that they could develop asthma later in their life from some sort of change, like a new area that they moved to or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you ever have any symptoms when you were a kid?
I got allergies when I was a kid, but nothing very strong. I would sneeze and get itching eyes and things like that, but never really any intense respiratory issues with allergens till I moved here.
And did you cough a lot though as a kid?
No, I don't think so. Maybe I don't think so. Why?
Because a lot of times that coughing is those tubes spasming.
Oh.
And so you could have had that as a child.
Huh. Interesting.
And
Okay.
absolutely, you're absolutely right. It can flare up later on in life.
Oh, but it's maybe something that there hasn't been a lot of stress from the environment, and then you move somewhere where there's more stress from the environment, and that's when. Okay, that's good to know. I didn't realize that it could be something underlying that you just don't have some sort of stimulus that's affecting it yet. That's good to know. So that would be important for people to know, I think, is that no matter where you're at in life, there could be something going on that you didn't know about before. And so it's important to be monitoring these things and making sure you're getting your checkups and talking to your doctor about things that are concerning you, things like that. Cool. And then lastly, we wanted to talk about cystic fibrosis. I don't have a lot of background information on cystic fibrosis, so I think, Tammy, you're going to have to help me out on this one.
All right. Well, cystic fibrosis is kind of, sorry about that. Cystic fibrosis is kind of like bronchiectasis per se. It's a genetic disease that it doesn't allow sodium to cross barriers. So their mucus gets like super, super thick, and it distorts their airways. And I think the average lifespan for cystic fibrosis right now is about 31 years old. So it is very devastating.
That is really young.
So when they first started discovering cystic fibrosis, parents noticed that their kids were salty. So you literally could lick a kid
And they were
and
salty, like
they were salty.
they
Hmm.
tasted salty on their skin, like they were
Hmm.
sweating a lot or something.
Not necessarily sweat. Their skin was just salty.
Interesting.
And so that's actually how they diagnose it. It's called a sweat chloride test. And
Wow.
they do just about everything. They do breathing treatments, they do percussion, they do, you know, lots of different therapies. I mean, these kids, from the time that they're probably, well, you can have it from the time you're born to have issues, but usually it's probably within about first year or two of from birth. And so they are living with this nonstop, and the only way to be able to remedy it is actual lung transplants.
Wow. That is, and I'm sure that there's probably a long waiting list to get a
There
lung
is,
transplant. Yeah.
there is. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, that sounds like a very devastating condition.
It is.
So you talked a little bit about breathing training for cystic fibrosis. In our class, we were learning about different breathing exercises, and it seemed like we could use these for most conditions with COPD. We talked about deep belly breathing and some pursed lip breathing. Are
Mm-hmm.
those breathing exercises that you recommend as well to?
Absolutely. What happens is there's nothing more panicky when you can't breathe. I've seen people chop off a finger. I've seen heart attacks. I've seen, I mean, just a myriad of traumas. But there is nothing that more than you see fear in patients' eyes than when they can't breathe. And what happens is when they get to that point, they start increasing their respiratory rate. Well, when you increase your respiratory rate, they end up trapping more and more air in their lungs. And it's like if you don't empty the glass with every breath and you leave some in there, your lungs get fuller and fuller and tighter and tighter. And you literally are only ventilating the top part of your lungs a lot of times when you have such anxiety with that. So normal lungs generally breathe at about a 1-to-2 ratio. Let's just in 1 second, out 2 seconds. COPD lungs actually require 1-to-4, twice as long to exhale, just because those airways are floppy or they're swollen or they're clamped down. And that's where the pursed lip breathing comes into play, is because when you do that pursed lip breathing, it puts just enough back pressure into those tubes to help stent them open for just a split second longer. I mean, it's not a perfect fix, but it helps them to empty their lungs. And it's interesting to see patients and it may take 5, 10, 15 minutes for them to be able to get their lungs emptied enough to where they can go, oh, I can breathe now. So it absolutely recommend that. And most of my COPD patients do it and don't even realize that they're actually doing it.
Oh, wow.
They're generally amazed. They've just naturally learned it.
Huh. Well, that's interesting. So that just with their condition, they've realized, oh, this helps me if
mm-hmm.
Okay.
But they don't realize that they're doing it. Yeah.
And that's really cool. We did learn that, and I didn't realize that the reason that we're breathing out longer than we're doing this inhale is because the lungs need to empty all this trapped air, and so that it can refill again.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you're only getting rid of just a little bit of air, then there's not a lot of new air coming in, and so there's not a lot of help for your.
Right, and what does come in gets trapped in there, and those little air sacs get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Wow. So for you listeners out there that are wondering what we're meaning is where you would inhale for a couple seconds, you go, and then when you exhale, you purse your lips.
Kind of like a whistle.
Yeah, like a whistle, and and a ratio that I saw online earlier when I was looking this up is maybe 2 seconds in, 4 seconds out. Or I think that you were saying, Tammy, 1 second in, 4 seconds out. Is that right?
Yes, a 1-to-4 ratio.
1-to-4. But yeah, And Tammy, do you recommend that? So somebody has some sort of panicked breathing episode. Are you recommending that this could be something that they could treat with the pursed lip breathing, or should they be doing this on the way to the hospital or something? What are your recommendations with
Well, if they're coming to the hospital, they're generally doing it already.
that?
But it kind of depends on what the trigger is. If anything can trigger an exacerbation, stress can trigger it. And then when you get short of breath, it even more stress triggers it more. So I would try the pursed lip breathing first. And if it doesn't go away, then that's when I would be reaching for my inhaler or my nebulizer and go, okay, maybe I'm starting a flare up. Let's take a treatment and see if that helps. Because there's two main reasons that you get short of breath. One's your lungs and one's your heart. So I always say, and it's kind of hard to tell which is the problem. So I always say sit down for about 5 minutes. If it goes away, then you probably taxed your heart a little bit. If it doesn't go away, then reach for that inhaler. And then in about 30 minutes, if it still doesn't go away, then that should raise a big red flag going, something's going on. And then that's when you go to get checked out.
So it's a matter of just sitting down, making sure we're relaxing and doing these things. And then if after 30 minutes of all these different interventions, if we're still not seeing improvements, then that's when we have a fear that we need of an emergency that we need to be handling. But
Yes.
it's good to just do our best to calm down, help ourselves realize that it's going to be okay. Try to get some good ventilation going on and that usually will treat it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. That is really good. That's probably one of the more important things we'll cover. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that will have these episodes, and they, when you're panicked like that, you don't know what to do. But hopefully our listeners will remember what you were talking about, Tammy, and they'll be able to apply that and have better outcomes. Tammy, I had been wondering about this with the patients that you see and meet with during these meetings. Do you recommend to them exercise? Is exercise going to see improvements with COPD? Is the body able to handle ventilation better as patients exercise?
That's a tricky question. Absolutely, exercise will help. The main reason, and the one muscle group that you really should exercise is your thighs, because they have to hold you up, they have to walk you around. I mean, even if you are just doing leg lifts in a chair, you're still keeping those muscles tuned up because you need to keep them tuned up. Ventilation's not generally an issue when you're up moving around. It's oxygenation. You've got to be able to keep those muscles in tune so that they can efficiently use oxygen. So that's why absolutely exercise, and start small. Walk to the front door and back a couple of times. Okay, then next week, let's go into the driveway and back. You've got to keep them tuned up.
That's good to know. There are there's an organization in town called the Walk with Ease program, and that's actually I think it's a nationwide program. And so they talk about the benefits of walking, and they do some gradual increases. But that's good for patients to realize, is that just walking can be a really good exercise. Good for your heart, good for your muscles, and your lungs as well. Yeah. So I like that recommendation as well. The recommendation to start walking back and forth from the door, and then gradually increasing as you feel more comfortable to longer distances.
Mm-hmm. The hardest thing.
No, you go. What were you saying, Tammy?
The hardest thing for patients to remember is to not hold their breath, especially going up and down stairs. They like to hold their breath when they're exerting themselves, and it's a real conscious effort when they're walking to not hold your breath.
I think that I get that sometimes too when I'm doing some sort of exercise that's kind of strenuous. I catch myself holding my breath, and it's important that we are breathing, because what we've talked about is oxygenation. Our tissues, our muscles, everything needs oxygen to work properly. And so if we're holding our breath, then we're not getting proper oxygen to the tissues in our body that need it. That's good. That's a good reminder for our listeners. Are there any other exercises that you recommend, or do you think of focus on the thigh exercises like walking and leg lifts? Is that a good place to start?
You can also do simple band exercises, or even just go get a couple of cans of soup and do, bicep curls and whatnot, because you do use a lot of your chest muscles to breathe. And that helps to, one, help to keep that loose, and those muscles moving. I would always recommend, neck stretches and whatnot, because patients that have a hard time breathing, they're constantly, just such tight upper body muscles from stress and trying to breathe. So you have to remind them to, neck stretch, roll around, shoulder rolls, everything, and that helps to keep those loose. But lightweight training. I don't necessarily want to become a bodybuilder, but some light stuff.
I like that. So some patients, I'm sure, or people who are heavily involved with COPD, and they're I'm sure are discouraged. What are some suggestions you have to get patients motivated to start moving and start getting this help from exercise? How can they get started on that?
You have to start with small goals. Like I said, go to the front door and back. Okay, yep, I can do that now. Because if they say, okay, I'm going to walk around the block 3 times a week, and they get to the driveway and they're done, it's very defeating. So start with small goals. And you almost have to have a cheerleader that's going to push you and keep you motivated into doing these activities. But make them small, successful goals, because if you start failing at the goals, it's kind of like the New Year resolutions, we're all about to make and fail at.
Yes.
So you definitely have to start small.
Well, I like that. And I love setting goals. I think that's a good principle it's just something that's a little bit stretching, but it'll still make you feel good about yourself if you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great. That is really great advice. Thank you. And then I only have one more question about this. As a university, we're starting a nonprofit called the Academy for Lifelong Health and Wellness. And we're starting these things to kind of help educate patients. Do you think there's anything else as a community or as a university we could do to help people with COPD and other lung diseases?
I don't know if you guys are allowed to create kind of educational sessions, and maybe you can work with the exercise physiologist program at Dixie and maybe create, some Tai Chi yoga classes, or I don't know.
I think that's that is actually a really great idea. We're with this academy that we're starting, and we're going to upload the podcast onto it. That is one of the ideas we had, is to start making some light exercise videos for people to start doing, so that they can see improvements in their lives. But that's great. I think it'd be good, and we have some really good professors that might be good at helping us get more involved with that as well. So thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, and it's been really educational for me as well. I thought I knew a lot about COPD from my major, but I've learned a lot today. So thank you so much for your time and all the knowledge that you've helped us to gain from this.
You bet.
This is the end of our session here for Healthy Hearts and Lungs. I hope you guys all have a great day. Remember to check out the Better Breathers Club. Can you just remind us of some contact information for that, Tammy, just in case they forgot?
You bet. It's Tammy Stucki. Phone number is 435-251-1651, or you can email me at tammy.stuckey@imail.org.
Perfect. Well, that concludes our session here. Thank you guys so much for listening and being a part of this. I hope that this has been informational and helpful. We'll see you guys later. Have a good day.